In this week's lessons, we'll focus on the acquisition of talent, which is a part of the employment function of HR. As mentioned last week, human capital is the one asset that a firm has that cannot be copied by the competition. So talent acquisition is a hugely critical component of HR. Through this week's 4 lectures, we'll take a look at workforce planning, techniques for recruiting talent, the importance of employment branding, and finally the selection process. First, we'll look at how the employment functions focus from the beginning stages of talent acquisition, how it's evolved, and where it should be investing time and resources to be most effective. In the recent past, and sometimes even today in more unfortunate situations, recruiters were no more than order takers. They receive requests, post jobs, and screen applicants. However, good strategic recruiters vary their approach. They understand the company mission, the strategies, the growth, and the resulting talent strategies or talent that's needed in the company for its present and its future. They understand the characteristic skills, attitudes, and behaviors of their top performers in their organizations, and they recruit for those talents. They have strong relationships with hiring managers. That way, recruitment isn't just a handoff of candidates to a manager, but it's a collaborative partnership. Both the manager and HR recognize the importance of investing time to really understand what the department needs for talent acquisition to be most successful. Now let's talk about an HR buzz term that you're likely to hear frequently, workforce planning. In its simplest terms, workforce planning is getting the right number of people with the right skills, experiences, and competencies in the right jobs at the right time. Sounds easy, right? But it's actually a systematic process for understanding the needs of the organization prior to sending out job positions into the ether and waiting for applicants. Understanding the needs of the organization is a critical step to ensuring that both HR and hiring managers don't waste valuable time assessing candidates who aren't a good fit for the organization. An integral part of workforce planning is identifying the gaps in talent. By looking at current skills and capabilities and holding those up alongside current and future needs, workforce planning allows us to understand if we have the right capabilities to deliver on longer-term strategies. As we'll talk about later, this will lead to recruiting efforts or additional training and development for existing staff. Workforce planning efforts are often driven by activities within the organization, including things such as planned growth, when a company opens a new store, plans a new strategic unit, develops a new product or service, or plans an overseas expansion, just to name a few. Any of those cases, proactive identification of human capital issues is key. Hiring managers, in holding up needs and talent side by side, may identify that the talent they have actually don't have the skills needed for the current or future direction of the business. Identifying those gaps proactively is much better than a failed store or product launch down the road due to the lack of needed talent. Workforce planning allows managers to have a strategy for addressing present and anticipated workforce issues, rather than being surprised by events. Workforce planning provides a lens into the talent dynamics of the workforce. For instance, workforce demographics are used by proactive hiring managers in identifying long-term concerns, like an aging workforce, for example. Then they can project retirements and look at where succession planning is needed, and what employee competencies will be lost to retirement for position planning purposes. Succession planning is the long-term strategic filling of necessary positions, and having those positions in mind far ahead of the actual retirement dates of the company talent. The technology to mine the metrics to do this type of planning is embedded within most HR management systems, so we in HR need to proactively evaluate this data and report to management the workforce trends to head off potential issues in the future. Let's look at some of the steps in human resources for workforce planning. The first step is to review the organization mission, objective, and strategies to really understand the current and future states of the organization. Step 2 is to review the human capital objectives and strategies. Step 3 looks at the current human resources. How many people are available now and with what qualifications? Step 4 is to forecast how many people will be required to meet HR needs, when will those people be needed, and what types of people and characteristics would be best. And then Step 5 is making the comparison between needs and assets, matching people to openings. This includes looking at recruiting and selection, determining whether training and development will produce these people internally, evaluating labor management relations, compensation and benefits, and many more facets that go into human resource planning. As previously stated, workforce planning identifies talent gaps between the current and future needs of the organization. So we might look at who has particular talents internally that might be retained and nurtured. And more importantly, who's at risk of leaving? You'll likely hear this a lot in your HR career, but it's exponentially more expensive to hire and train a new employee than to retain and train a current one. As such, HR might look at the workforce to determine who are good performers but haven't had much movement. They're good producers, for instance, but really haven't had promotion opportunity. Or perhaps they're sitting in departments where there's been a lot of management change. These employees should be identified and engaged with to determine where their talents lie and what their goals are. Further building off of that, HR should be aware of how much people will be willing to retrain in the future. And to know the training needs, you'll need to know a starting point. So HR and management should take stock of current staff skills, knowledge, experience, attitudes to change, attitudes towards career development, etc. How many people will be needed in the short-term future, maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, and what will their skills be? And what are the pivotal roles for business success now and in the coming years? Moving on, HR needs to develop strategies to address priority issues. Some of those strategies might be things like developing an external hiring plan if the organization doesn't have the skills or time to develop internally. Perhaps the plan requires a retention strategy, or maybe even a removal of an employee or position. There are a lot of approaches to how workforce planning is carried out in an organization, but I'd like to share one very effective integrated approach that truly demonstrates the systematic nature of workforce planning. The overall idea to this approach is the ongoing review. Every 6 weeks, a manpower plan is reviewed by both line managers and HR. They take a look at their talent assets, who they have, what are their skills, what will they need in the future. They anticipate their talent needs 1 to 2 years out, and then they review the workforce against those needs, taking into account things like performance review results, career development, and career goals that employees have. The workforce is then cataloged and evaluated based on employees who show promise and could be real future assets to the company, and those who might not be performing to expectations as well. Out of this planning exercise, HR managers develop a talent pool. Oftentimes we think of a talent pool as external, but this exercise results in an internal talent pool. Who does the company already employ who can be moved, developed, challenged, or earmarked for promotion? Talent spotting is a company's ability to identify employee capabilities and skills that can be valued and should be leveraged. Effective talent spotting can decrease the need for external hires. In the case of the previous example, talent spotting was a routine activity by management and HR. To be clear, though, identifying talent is more than selecting employees who model existing senior staff behaviors. Oftentimes, that's exactly what happens. Certain skills are prized because they're what senior executive X might do. But what needs to happen first is the identification of skills and behaviors for future needs and company success. Today's success profile, that is, the skills and attributes that are currently valuable to the organization, might not be tomorrow's needs, So HR needs to make sure to look for those future skills as well. Continuing with this case study organization, the manager and HR identified some employees as high potentials. These people were identified as having medium to high operational results, medium to high people skills, and especially a high growth potential internally. Another group was identified from the talent pool and labeled top performers. Those employees' operational results were high, their people skills were high, and their growth potential low to medium because they probably were in that top performer situation. Then there are the folks that were strong and steady. Their operational results were medium, their people skills were medium, and their growth potential was probably low to medium. And lastly, they identified a group of low performers who didn't quite fit on the same page, whose operational results were low to medium, their people skills were low to medium, and the growth potential was low. By developing this categorization, the company was able to identify and catalog their current talent in order to project their future assets. This is the essence of workforce planning. When building a talent pool, you need to look internally and externally, and most companies look externally only after they've identified internal potentials. But when it comes time to shift to an external search, there are a few strategies you can employ. For instance, you can capture the names of references of applicants, people that refer a candidate to you. You can also reward employee referrals. Your internal candidates know the organization and likely know who will fit into your company. Many organizations also recruit former employees. There's nothing wrong with going back to someone who's done a great job in the past. You can target university alumni groups and monitor executive changes, take notes of layoffs or plant closings. Where is there talent sitting out there that you might be able to capture and leverage in your organization? Develop your database of potential talent by using these and other recruitment strategies to enhance your workforce planning. And in fact, this can be done not only to recruit for job openings, but also to staff internal projects or initiatives. Again, using organizational systems, capturing data, and identifying what needs you will have will be integral to planning the successful future of your organization's workforce.